Good evening. Delighted to be here in Leeds. And first confession is that my allegiances are on the other side of the Pennines. I did my MBA in the 80s and my doctorate in, finished it and graduated last year at Manchester Business School. So apologies, but at least we're all in the north, looking for the commonality. So I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to talk this evening about some of my experiences working with clients, international clients around the world, and to relate that to connected leadership, which is the topic of my doctoral research and the topic of my recent book. I'm very happy to take questions during or later on when we do the formal Q&A. Connected leadership. Well, we live in a world where the pace of change is accelerating exponentially. And so for me, the connectivity that is happening on a social level, on an international level, is perhaps the biggest challenge, I think, that organisations are facing today. Hence the focus on leadership and how to lead an organisation and create an organisation that is capable of matching and being sustainable given the rate of change around us. Many of you probably have heard of Charles Handy's analogy of the frog in the saucepan. If the water is cooled up very slowly, the frog will not respond to the changing environment and will die. Whereas if you drop a frog in the hot water, it would obviously jump out very quickly if it's able. And there's a danger that some of the larger organisations with which we work are in the former rather than the latter state, but are struggling to come to terms with the changes going on around us. So connected leadership, what's it all about? Well, it's becoming more values-based, collaborative, devolving decision-making, and creating this agility as well as performance, which is key to that connection with the external environment. And I'm very pleased that FT Publishing have put the book out last December, and it's going live in. I've just come back from Australia and Singapore, where it's going live this month in March. So far, so good. Why is all this important? What's the basis? What's the background to this need for connectivity? Well, you will have noticed the erosion of trust that has gone on over the last few years in the corporate world. The level of trust is at its lowest for the last 20 years in both corporates and national governments, but particularly large corporates are experiencing quite a debilitating erosion of trust. And you look at organisations like Volkswagen and the debacle last year to realise that it's not just the banks that have been through this process of trust erosion, but it can happen to organisations across sectors. And whether it's G4S and government contracts, or Volkswagen and emission control, we as consumers are becoming more and more sceptical about organisations and what they stand for. And actually, what the research suggests that we take what organisations stand for more and more seriously. We're more concerned about the organisation behind the product than we've ever been, and yet our confidence in the organisations behind the product is at a rather worrying level. Another factor is the complexity, the globalization, the volatile markets that we see around us, the fact that stock exchanges can be fluctuating on a daily, weekly basis, and the impact of social media, the level of transparency that brings. A customer can have a bad experience and tweet, and that can go out to 1 million customers of large organizations within seconds. And organisations are struggling to keep up with that. Some research by Freshfields last year into corporate response to emergencies and to reputation-damaging events suggested that it takes on average about 18 hours for a large corporate to start to respond to a major crisis. But it's out there in the social media world within seconds. So there's a gap between the ability of the organisation to respond and the organisational reputational damage. And so technology has changed our behaviour. We live in a world where, with cloud computing, there's talk about virtual reality becoming normal and part of normal customer experience. This year, the Internet of Things is exploding. So the use of technology to link devices from Fitbits on our wrists to earthquake sensors around the world. There's currently, it's estimated to be 2 billion devices connected to the Internet of Things. That number will move to about over 50 billion by 2020, and that's 4 years away. So that's the exponential rate of change that's going on around us is changing our behaviour. This is a photograph one of my colleagues took on the tube last week in London. I think there were 20 people in the carriage. Every single one was looking at their smartphone and interacting with the rest of the world through that small interface. So that's normal. And I'd rather like this slide from we do some research with Ipsos Mori in the UK. And it's just technology has just become part of our lives. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll probably recognise, self-actualization at the top, physiological needs and survival at the bottom. Perhaps more fundamental than any of those is now our access to Wi-Fi, which if we haven't got it, does cause a certain physiological response and a high level of personal stress, as I do experience sometimes on trains. That's a joke, by the way. The execution of strategy, again, we see a lot of organisations we work with really struggling to get that level of execution effectively played out in a way that is responsive to the changes that are going on around them. I don't know whether you remember 2013, the America's Cup over in San Francisco, and Sir Ben Ainslie from Macclesfield, I might add, that famous town in Cheshire. The US team were I think 8-0 down, and he took over the team, and they won 9-8, and it was the longest ever America's Cup final. But it's just he managed to get the team working effectively to execute the plan they had in a way that the previous incumbent had failed to do. And then finally, the need for pace and agility. The research we've done with Ipsos Mori, both last year and this year, because they use the Connected Leadership Framework in their Captains of Industry research, which goes out to the top 500 CEOs across the UK. The number one priority last year from the CEOs for what they needed their organisation to be more of was around agility. This year, and we published the results this morning in London, this year the priority has morphed slightly into innovation. But the two are very closely linked. Your ability to be agile and to be innovative within the changing market context is the number one priority for CEOs of large and medium-sized corporates, according to the research. So this is a real challenge. And interestingly, for those of us who work in the sort of HR field, the CEOs and the C-suite respondents to the survey also said that they found that HR's ability to contribute was lower in this area than in some others. So there is an expectation, there's a need for greater agility and to orchestrate an organisational climate to have greater agility, and a gap in terms of the level of delivery from HR to orchestrate and support that shift in culture. So that's a real challenge for the HR community. I'm sure you've all heard of Moore's Law, the doubling of computing power every 2 years. Founder of Intel, Gordon Moore, recognized this exponential increase in technology, and that has pretty much continued to this day. Some debate as to whether it can continue given the nature of physical matter, but it has been an exponential journey for the last 50 years, and organizations are struggling to stay up with that, and struggling to stay up with the impact of mobile, for example, and the smartphone experience. So these are the things that are on the minds of senior players in large organizations. So let's start to think about this concepts and the related ideas around connectivity. And we're in good company. Harvard Business Review at the end of 2014 talked about the emphasis on connectivity both within and outside the enterprise, looking at connections with customers, with employees, and the communities in which they operate. And I think, again, organizations are looking to a higher sense of purpose Unilever, for example, are reinterpreting their purpose as an organisation to be about social impact and have set clear goals around changing the way their products demonstrate that social impact, which is having a major impact on their level of innovation. So the connectivity within organisations and outside those organisations is becoming a much more high profile and relevant issue than perhaps it was even 10 years ago. So this is a little bit from my research. Obviously it's slightly biased in terms of the conclusion, but if we look on the x-axis, we've got time, and from the 50s we had theory X and Y, and transactional leadership in the 80s, and leader-member exchange in the 90s, ethical leadership, transformational leadership. These are all leadership theories of great note, and they've all provide actually a really interesting insight into effective leadership. So there's nothing wrong with any of them. They're actually very helpful. What I've noticed is that they demonstrate an increasing emphasis on the shared nature of leadership. And what I'd talk about, what I and many others describe as a less heroic approach to the leader. And I think organisations are realising, and a lot of research supports the idea of leadership moving away from the leader and the hero to leadership and a process of influence and enablement within the organisation to allow it to become more agile, fluid and dynamic and responsive to the changing world we've just been describing. So this move towards more distributed, more complex leadership and connected leadership, I think, is we're trying to summarise and capture that journey towards this much more shared process. And some of the key theories are drawn upon distributed leadership theory, so the sharing of leadership across the enterprise in tune with customer needs is key. Interestingly, originally came out of research in education and primary healthcare, but actually applying it to the corporate world, I think is what the focus of my doctoral research was started with, and it's resonating very, very strongly in that context. Authentic leadership, again, a main body of research into being values-based, and we'll talk about a little bit about this more, but this sense of there are certain principles that are important that engender trust, both with colleagues and with customers and with community at large. And if those principles are not in place, then we've got an amoral situation, which as consumers we're not comfortable with. And the financial crisis in 2008 precipitated, I think, a major rethink amongst consumers about, well, what do we want from the enterprises that drive social wealth? And then thirdly, complexity leadership theory, drawing on the concepts around complexity theory and the fact that the level of change and unpredictability that we are dealing with in the globalized connected market means that some of our certainties are no longer certain, and we need to be able to adapt to that and respond to that in a way that is more organic and more dynamic. So there's this increasing shared approach. So the 6 factors that came out of my work, and again, this is really a packaging of both the results of my empirical research, but more importantly, the main body of leadership research that's been going on, boiled down to these 6 factors. And again, any model is a simplification, and I would absolutely not acknowledge that. But I think models help us to communicate and adopt new thinking in a way that then becomes useful. So the fundamental at the bottom, what I call the 6th factor, is senior leadership commitment. And it's stating the obvious, I know, but if the senior leaders of an organisation don't want to change, the organisation is less likely to change because organisations typically are not democracies, and those senior leaders do retain or have a high level of discretion about what that organisation does and doesn't do. So if senior leaders don't buy into it, wasting your time. If they are supportive but are a little unsure, then we've got some room to move, and we've got some sort of opportunity to make progress. If they're committed, then that's brilliant. And then in the middle, you've got two areas that seem to create a framework within which everything else can operate. And again, this is perhaps stating the obvious, but if the organisation is clear and the leadership within the organisation are clear about the purpose, which is why we exist in the first place, and the direction, the strategy, the plans, and the ways the purpose is to be delivered, vision, if you like, and strategy. If the purpose, the why and the what are clear, then we've got some basis for joined up activity. And then authenticity refers to those values we talked about, values-based leadership, which is about how we're going to operate. You know, what are the principles by which we operate? What's important around here? What's driving our culture? And again, if those two things are clear and supportive of a more connected approach, then we've got a framework which allows a high degree of devolution, a high degree of letting go. If those things aren't in place, then the letting go will be random, or have increasing risks of being random. So we need a framework within which to enable the organisation to be more connected and more agile. So if we've got those three at the bottom, those three things in place, or those three things clear, then we've got a framework within which the organisation can start to operate differently. So we take the three along the top. Devolved decision making. So we've been talking about empowerment for 20 years, but most organisations have varying degrees of empowerment, and I'd say many organisations have very low levels of empowerment in my experience. Or if they do, it tends to lead to an adhocracy. It tends to lead to a situation where it's sort of, okay, let's hope everybody makes the right decision, but I'm going to let go a little bit if I'm the boss, which is really not terribly effective. What we want is an active and coordinated process of devolution that enables people to make great decisions. So let's take, anybody here shop at Zara? Probably quite a few. Zara, yeah. It's been described as the most disruptive retailer in the world. Spanish company owned by Inditex, set up in the 70s, 2,000 stores around the world. They are, in my view, one of the most connected organisations we can study. They're highly disruptive. They work on the basis that every store manager and their team decide what they sell in each store twice a week. They make the decision what's selling in Manchester and what's selling in Leeds and what's selling in Manila will be different. But the whole organisation is geared to support that devolved decision making. The supply chain is highly controlled, highly integrated, and very able to respond very quickly to that process of devolution. So it's not random, it's not an accident, it's by design. And the store managers and their team have very up-to-date management information, they're well trained, they've got all the facilities in which they're able to make appropriate and effective decisions. So it's not random, it's managed, it's a process, it's a coordinated enterprise-wide activity. Inditex also are very strong on the next factor, which is about collaborative achievement. And that's both within team and cross-team collaboration. They recruit for teamwork. It's their major criterion for recruitment and selection. Just another example is the Red Arrows. You've probably heard of the Red Arrows, the brilliant fighter pilots. They have a week-long assessment centre for new pilots, and they replace their pilots a third each year. Their week-long assessment centre it involves flying and some tests and interviews, but what they're really looking for is teamwork. Because when you're flying several inches away from somebody else's wing and something goes wrong, you want to know that the guy next to you or the woman next to you is actually a team player. And that's what they're looking for. Somebody who has that mindset that says, under the most intense pressure, I will do what's right for the team rather than what's right for me. So that collaborative achievement is a mindset as well as a set of behaviours around being influential and open to influence and putting the interests of the collective ahead of one's own. So collaborative achievement, Inditex do it brilliantly because they recruit for that. The Red Arrows do it brilliantly because they recruit for that. Those are fundamental criteria for entry. And then finally, agility is about the ability to be innovative, to learn, to experiment, to take risk. And Inditex, again, show a high level of agility in their, for example, new product development. They can get a new product to market in 4 weeks. So in certain situations, that can be 2 weeks, which is pretty impressive when you've got 2,000 stores working in 88 different countries. So those are the 6 factors, and you can see that they build up in a hierarchy. Without the layers below, they are less effective, or actually probably unsustainable. So let's take each in turn. Silly the commitment. This creates the potential for more connectivity. That's all. And in my experience, you can if the leaders are open to it, have a go, then you can work with them to get to a point of, yeah, there's enough evidence here to feel confident to take the next step. But if the leaders of an organisation aren't willing to have a go, this is the wrong approach for them. And they're better off sticking in a command and control situation where they're comfortable. What the downside of command and control is that it's not terribly agile unless the boss spots the need for agility, because people do what they're told. Next one, purpose and direction. A simple, a lovely story, and you've probably heard it before, so bear with me. But there's 3 bricklayers, and we walk up to the first bricklayer and ask him what he's doing. And he says, I'm laying bricks. And you think, well, that's clear. Role definition's spot on. You know, he's laying bricks. So you ask the second bricklayer what he's doing, and he says, I'm building a wall. Okay, that's extended that sense of purpose to another level. He's got a recognition of an output from their collective activities. That's great. And you ask the third bricklayer what he's doing, and he looks up, and he says, I'm building a hospital where babies will be born and lives will be saved. And that's the sense of purpose. That's recognizing the higher social value of what we're doing in our job. We do work a lot with 3, the mobile operator in the UK, part of Hutchison One Power out of Hong Kong. Now 3 or 4 years ago, was the most complained about network in the UK, had rock bottom customer satisfaction, and was also loss making. So it wasn't a very successful entity. Over the last 4 years, they've been on a journey to get back to the fundamental reason they were set up in the first place, which was to be the challenger to the incumbent suppliers in the UK mobile market. They went back to their sense of purpose. What were they there for? And you may have seen the adverts with Jackson and the Make It Right, and we're changing the rules of mobile. What they have been doing is getting back to that sense of purpose internally, and then when they were able to, making that external. So they've changed the rules on, Feel at Home says wherever you are in the world or in certain markets, you're not going to get billed excessively or even any differently to UK tariff. And there are various other initiatives like changing of the tariffs on 0800 numbers and so on that have just been about putting control back to customers and demonstrating and putting the consumer's interests first rather than simply profiteering. So Power Purpose at 3 has led them to be, they won the Which Report in 2015 for the best customer experience and for the best network, and they are, according to Ofcom, the least complained about network in the UK. So the power of purpose has transformed the customer experience and the organisation. But they've had to make some very difficult decisions along the way. But Dave Dyson, who's the CEO, who has been very brave on this journey, to make some very bold decisions, such as, for example, shifting incentives from being incentives for salespeople, moving from individual to team-based, collaborative incentives, which meant they lost some of their top salespeople. So those are big, brave decisions, but it's this core purpose that has enabled them to make this transformation. So what's purpose and direction about? It's telling the story well. It's clarity on where we're going and why it's important. It's encouraging dialogue to increase understanding and commitment and helping people make sense of strategies and priorities. And sense making, something I learned from Kathy. Kathy was my supervisor, by the way, my principal supervisor when I did my doctorate. And so she was very supportive and very some very helpful advice along the way. So thank you, Kathy. But you did teach me about Carl Weick and sense making. In fact, it's the first thing you ever mentioned to me, I think. We're all making sense all of the time. All of you are making sense at the moment about what's going on in this room, about the temperature, about what I'm coming out with, whether you think it's any good or not. That's just, we're doing that consciously or subconsciously all the time. As leaders of an organization or as leaders of a team, we can help our team, our colleagues, make sense in a more effective way by asking them, drawing out from them, and enabling a conversation that helps people to collectively make sense of what's going on in the organization as a whole. So the second factor is around authenticity, which is about creating trust or rebuilding trust. And remember BP and Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico a few years ago. Fundamentally, that was a breakdown of trust driven by two things, I believe, and according to a lot of the analysis. One was a lack of principle in terms of the commercial interests on that particular piece of equipment. And secondly, was a culture where people were scared or uncomfortable with raising issues. Yeah. Both sort of commercial interests and was a problem. But I think more fundamental to them than that was the lack of confidence in people actually challenging the status quo. So authenticity is about leaders becoming genuine role models and making those difficult decisions that say we need to be trusted. We need to have principles that we won't violate, even if it means we make, on the face of it, less profit. It draws on emotional intelligence and the ability of leaders to be self-aware and to know how they are interacting and managing their emotions. And then leading from that, having open and transparent relationships. Without that open and transparent relationship, why would we expect anybody to say what's really on their mind if they're just, fearing what the consequences might cause? And then being trusted to be balanced and fair. Yeah. So, on the face of it, that doesn't seem a lot, but I think that's a massive journey for a lot of managers and leaders to go on. But creating an authentic environment and being authentic individuals is fundamental to unlocking connectivity in the organisation. Otherwise, we just remain siloed in our functions and siloed as individuals. So if all of that's in place, and that's a big if, obviously, and it's not like it's either on or off. This is a journey that organisations go on. But devolved decision making to create involvement. I'm not a military history specialist, but I have read a little bit along the way about military history. And back in 1806, the Prussian army was the preeminent army in Europe, and it was defeated twice by the French with Napoleon after the French Revolution. Prussian army, fantastic massed organisation of great strength. French, a little bit less organised, but quite passionate and with a driving sense of purpose. Great example, and actually so it's a great example of what purpose actually can do as well. But what it led to was a complete rethink amongst the Prussian generals of how to get back on top, how to redress the imbalance that the French had created. And what they did was three things, and I simplified, but three things. The first was they established a code of conduct, what we'd call values today, that said we encourage initiative, we encourage people who question, we encourage people who will willingly step out of line. The second thing they did was set up a leadership college, a leadership academy, that said we need to train all our leaders to be effective at working within this new construct. And the third was around mission command, which is still practiced by armies today, which was basically the sense that von Clausewitz and the people who made these transformations, he coined the phrase, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Because when you're in a war situation, it's not quite what you planned, because the problem is there's another party or other parties. In the case of Syria, there's many parties involved. So we have to respond to what's in front of us. So as long as you've got your clarity around your framework, your direction, your purpose, and your values, your code of conduct, respond as you see fit to help us get to the mission. Yeah. So the Inditex manager in Manila is making decisions within the framework that enable Manila to be successful, given the values and the direction and purpose of the organisation. Just as the Prussians said, we need to enable our officers and our people to be able to respond, not necessarily based just simply on command. So these are principles that are played out in the best armies over the last 150 years, and the best organisations perhaps a little more recently. But we can learn from those lessons. So devolved decision making, first of all, starts with a belief in others. It's a mindset, first of all. Do we believe that others are capable? It's empowering them to decide and act. It's having clearly communicated parameters. These are the rules that are necessary to set. And then it's coaching others to be capable and building that up. So it's a planful process for an organisation to go through of thinking through decision rights and how much we can push those close to the customer while still retaining that spine of clarity and control within the organisation. The fourth one is around collaborative achievement to create great results. Zara we talked about. I've already talked about Zara, so we won't go on about them. But they put this all into practice in a beautiful way. So it's about being a team player, having trusting relationships. Fundamentally, it's about cross-functional working. We see so many organisations that are still locked in silos. And as tribal human beings, it's quite natural for us to identify with and associate within our tribe. Our tribe might be our function, or it might be our region, or it might be our team, or it might be our division, or our business unit. But these are all constructs that are smaller than the whole organisation, and so therefore suboptimise organisational performance. So the breaking down of silos and the encouraging of cross-functional working is critical to processes working well, speed of customer response, and all the other factors that go along with collaboration. And fundamental to all of that is that we're open to influence. And we meet a lot of leaders who are perhaps less open to influence, and others who realise that to be able to collaborate, they need to be listening as well as telling. And then the sort of sixth factor is around agility, is about this creating change and this driving innovation. And the research I mentioned by Ipsos Mori and ourselves demonstrates that this is absolutely critical for organisations to be able to respond. Interesting though that what stops innovation? What stops that ability to take a risk, to fail? If you're going to fail fast, to learn from what's going on and to adapt. Well, the question was, do people have the right to make mistakes in your company? And only just over half of the people responding to that the survey across the top 500 in the UK said yes. So half our organisations are living in a culture where there is a sense of blame rather than learning. And it's slightly higher in HR, 58%. But still low percentages, really. I mean, that's half our organisations are not thriving in an environment where people are able to experiment, are able to take a risk, are able to step into a new place and learn what it's like, for fear of being blamed if it doesn't go right. That is a tragic waste. That is what causes a lack of productivity and improvement. There's another piece of research that I've learnt about at the British Academy of Management. The guy had been funded, a very, very clever professor, ex-head of, I can't remember his name now actually, I should do. But he did a lot of research in the 2000s into the productivity gap in the UK. And it boiled down to poor relationships between people managers and their people. You know, the people managers was not creating the environment for people to improve and flourish. And this speaks to that. So just massive problem that we need to tackle if we're going to be able to respond in a connected way to the changing context around us. So agility, prioritising ruthlessly. One of the things 3 did when they started on their journey of transformation was they stripped back the things that they thought were important. They said we can't be good at everything, we can't excel at everything. They had 500 IT projects on the go. None of them was being terribly productive. So they stripped that back to 80-something. So let's do 80 well. And then when we've done those, we can move on to the next ones. But if we're going to drive up the quality of our network, for example, we have to be more ruthless about what we're trying to do. So there's hard choices to be made if you're going to be agile. Focusing on customer insight, clearly understanding what's important to customers and how that's changing. The fail fast and learn experimentation approach, and then engaging others in the changes that you're trying to orchestrate. That's what agility is all about. M&S, an interesting case. M&S is one of the most It's an iconic brand in the UK. It's been around for 130 years. It's very values-based. Their values have changed in terms of the way they're defined, but the fundamental principles behind them haven't changed for 130 years. But they're an organisation that's struggling to change because of their deep-seated conservative approach. But they have started to radically change the way they organise and actually being very disruptive in terms of the way they're asking their senior managers to respond to change and taking them outside their comfort zone. And it's starting to play through in results. So that's the end of my formal input, and that's just our purpose: better leaders, better business, better lives. So hopefully that was, I hope you followed some of that, but I'd be happy to take questions.